Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. In February of 1978, 19-year-old Mary Frances Gregory left Ontario, Canada for what was supposed to be a road trip to California. But she never made it. The man traveling with her later said they crossed the United States together before he left Mary at a bus station in Las Vegas. But there's a problem. Almost everything we know about Mary's final days comes from him. No confirmed bus ticket, no verified sighting in Las Vegas, and no arrival in California. And nearly 50 years later, we still don't know where along that journey Mary actually disappeared. This is the story of Mary Frances Gregory's last trip. If Mary Gregory really did make it to Las Vegas in February of 1978, she arrived in a city very different from the Las Vegas we know today. Personally, I think 1970s Vegas is infinitely more interesting. There was no Bellagio, Venetian, or Mirage. The enormous themed resorts that would transform the Strip were still years away. This was Old Vegas. The Stardust, the Sands, the Desert Inn, Caesar's Palace, the Flamingo, the Tropicana, the Riviera. And downtown, Fremont Street was still the glowing heart of the city. This was before the Fremont Street experience covered the road with a giant canopy. You could drive straight down Fremont beneath enormous neon signs competing for attention, with casinos spilling light into the sidewalks and marquees advertising performers. Vegas wasn't subtle, and that was the point. Entertainment had become almost as important to the city's identity as gambling. Tom Jones was a fixture at the Flamingo during the 70s, while performers like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Elvis Presley, and Liberace had helped turn casino showrooms into destinations of their own. You didn't necessarily come to Vegas just to gamble. You came to escape for a few days. Eat too much, drink too much, stay up too late, see a show, lose some money, maybe make some questionable decisions, and then go home. And people were constantly coming and going. Tourists, gamblers, entertainers, casino workers, convention visitors, people looking for work, and people simply passing through. Las Vegas itself was expanding rapidly. UNLV oral histories recorded in February and March of 1978 described a changing city dealing with growth, tourism, transportation, crime, and a steady influx of new residents. But beneath the neon was another Las Vegas. In 1978, organized crime wasn't some colorful piece of history you learned about in a museum. It was happening. Anthony Spilatro, Tony the Ant, had been sent to Vegas in 1971 to oversee the Chicago outfit interests. The Las Vegas Review-Journal has described Las Vegas during this period as essentially an open city for numerous mafia families, with the Chicago syndicate particularly powerful. Mob influence extended into the casinos themselves, where money was being skimmed and secretly funneled to organized crime interests elsewhere in the country. And despite the way this era is sometimes romanticized today, there was nothing particularly glamorous about it. There were robberies, burglaries, loan sharking, and violence. Beyond the casino showrooms was a grittier street-level Vegas of motels, bars, adult entertainment, hustlers, and petty criminals mixed among ordinary residents and tourists. Now, that doesn't mean Las Vegas was some city filled entirely with dangerous people. It wasn't. It was also a real community where people worked, raised families, and lived completely ordinary lives. But crime was enough of a concern in that oral history interview conducted on February 20th, 1978, just 8 days before Mary's alleged arrival. when longtime resident Pearl Bush specifically discussed what she considered the city's high crime rate alongside its rapid growth and gambling culture. And if Mary's companion really did leave her at a bus station, she would most likely have found herself right in the middle of downtown. Greyhound was operating from the Union Plaza at the western end of Fremont Street during this period. So imagine it. February 28, 1978. Mary had supposedly just spent days crossing America, and now she's standing in downtown Las Vegas with her luggage. Outside is Fremont Street, neon everywhere, casino doors opening and closing, cars passing, tourists wandering between properties, people drinking and gambling, others catching buses out of town. Mary would have blended right in. She wasn't arriving as a tourist with a hotel reservation and a weekend planned. She was a 19-year-old traveler, alone, still hundreds of miles from where she intended to go. That's what makes Las Vegas such an eerie possible final setting for this story. The city was built around strangers. People arrived from everywhere, stayed briefly, and disappeared back into their regular lives. Mary could have purchased a ticket and left town without creating anything resembling the digital trail we expect today. Or she could have walked outside and encountered virtually anyone. If Mary really reached Las Vegas, she arrived during one of the city's most fascinating eras, when glamour was genuine, the mob wasn't history yet, and the neon advertised a place where you could temporarily become somebody else. For most visitors, that anonymity was part of the fantasy. For Mary, it may have made her extraordinarily difficult to find. Before Mary Frances Gregory became a missing person photograph, she was a 19-year-old woman from Parry Sound, Ontario, preparing for what must have felt like an enormous adventure. Mary was born on May 27, 1958, and grew up during the 1960s and 70s in a small northern Ontario community along the eastern shore of the Georgian Bay. Parry Sound is the kind of place where the landscape dominates everything around it. There are forests, rocky shorelines, and seemingly endless stretches of water with hundreds of islands scattered across the bay. The town itself was shaped by logging, railroads, and shipping before tourism became another major part of the local economy. Now, unfortunately, very little has been preserved publicly about Mary's childhood or her everyday life before her last trip. We don't know where she went to school or what she did for work. There are no reliable public accounts describing her hobbies, the music she listened to, the people she spent her time with, or what she imagined herself doing with her life. Even the names of her immediate family members don't appear in the major publicly available missing person records. For someone whose disappearance has remained unsolved for nearly half a century, Mary herself remains surprisingly elusive. And what has survived are the details investigators needed to identify her. Mary was small, about 5 feet 3 inches tall and roughly 110 pounds, with a fair complexion and hazel eyes. Her hair has variously been described as blonde, dark blonde, and brown, although more detailed descriptions place it somewhere between dark blonde and brown, and around shoulder length. She was nearsighted and wore contact lenses, and she had previously worn braces to correct an overbite, and her teeth were reportedly in good condition. She also had a small round birthmark on the right side of her chest near her rib cage, although descriptions of her identifying marks differ somewhat between databases. These are mundane details until someone disappears. And then suddenly the things nobody would normally think to record, like eyesight, dental work, and a birthmark, become some of the most important information left behind. What we do know about Mary is that by February 1978, Mary had made plans to go west. Her stated destination was Palo Alto. And Palo Alto feels oddly specific. Mary wasn't simply described as wanting to see California or travel to the West Coast. The destination preserved in her missing person records is Palo Alto, a city in the San Francisco Bay Area. Yet there is no publicly documented explanation for what was waiting for her there. We don't know whether she had friends in Palo Alto, planned to stay with someone, had work lined up, or had simply chosen it as somewhere she wanted to visit. The trip itself was described as a vacation. Whatever Mary's reason, she apparently intended to make the journey by car with a man whose name has never been publicly released. Even Mary's relationship with him is unclear. Depending on the source, he's been described as either a friend or an acquaintance. We don't know how they met, how long they had known one another, how old he was, or whether there was anything romantic between them. And that's important, because Mary was about to spend days traveling across North America with him. In 1978, that was a very different proposition than it would be today. There were no cell phones, GPS trackers, or location sharing. There was no quick text home from a gas station or photograph automatically uploaded with a location attached to it. A cross-country road trip meant paper maps, highway signs, roadside motels, diners, gas stations, and payphones. Once you left town, there could be enormous stretches of time when the people at home had no idea exactly where you were. And I don't want to describe her as adventurous or fearless, because nobody who knew Mary appears to have characterized her in that way. But choosing to travel from northern Ontario to California at 19 certainly required some degree of independence. Especially in February. She would be leaving a Canadian winter and crossing thousands of miles in unfamiliar territory before eventually reaching California. We don't know what she packed to bring with her. There's no publicly available inventory of the clothes or personal belongings she brought with her. And even what ultimately happened to those bags is disputed. Several sources report that Mary's luggage was never recovered, while at least one major missing person database has stated that it was. But before any of those belongings became potential evidence, they were simply the things a 19-year-old woman thought she would need in California. And there's something incredibly ordinary about that. Mary presumably stood in her home deciding how much to bring, what she would wear, and what she would leave behind. Was she packing for a trip she expected to return from? The California Department of Justice lists February 15, 1978, as Mary's last seen date in Parry Sound. Other databases have used February 18th, and researchers have suggested she may have left home on the 15th and crossed into the United States several days later. The exact chronology is something we'll get into when we follow Mary's journey. But before we put her inside that car, I think it's worth remembering just how young she was. At 19, most of your life is still hypothetical. There are careers you haven't started, people you haven't met, places you haven't visited, and versions of yourself you haven't had the chance to become. Mary would never get to tell us what any of those things were going to be. And because she disappeared in 1978, there isn't much of a digital footprint waiting for us to rediscover her decades later. There are no social media accounts filled with photographs, no playlists, no posts telling us what made her laugh or what annoyed her, no trail of tagged locations showing where she spent her weekends. What remains publicly is painfully small. A photograph, a handful of physical characteristics, a place called Parry Sound, a destination called Palo Alto, and a woman getting ready to leave home. That's the image of Mary I want to hold on to before we begin the story of her disappearance. Because sometime in February of 1978, Mary Frances Gregory packed for California and climbed into a vehicle with someone she knew. She wasn't leaving Parry Sound expecting to become a mystery. She was just going on a road trip. There was supposed to be a destination at the end of it. There were supposed to be stories she could tell when she came home. And somewhere between the life Mary knew in Ontario and the life she expected to continue in California, something happened. Because Mary was never heard from again. On Wednesday, February 15th, 1978, Mary left Parry Sound, Ontario, supposedly headed for Palo Alto, California. What happened over the next 13 days is the heart of this mystery. Because there's a fundamental problem with trying to reconstruct Mary's road trip. We don't actually know how much of it happened. The California Department of Justice lists February 15th as Mary's last seen date in Parry Sound. The Doe Network, citing Ontario police sources, also places her departure around this time. Mary was believed to have left Ontario in a vehicle with the male acquaintance mentioned earlier. From this point forward, we have to separate two very different things: where Mary is known to have been and where this man later said she had been. And those are not necessarily the same. Mary and her companion are believed to have crossed from Canada into the United States around February 18th, roughly 3 days after she left home. The exact crossing point has never been publicly identified. Ontario has multiple entry routes into New York State, and if the man's account is accurate, they would have crossed somewhere along that border. But there's no publicly released customs record, no named checkpoint, no border officer who remembered her, no receipt or document confirming the crossing, and no independent evidence publicly establishing when Mary entered the United States. February 18th is simply the date repeated in later summaries without disclosed supporting documentation. From there, the story becomes a route reconstructed almost entirely from one person's recollection. The man traveling with her later told authorities they drove through New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and finally Nevada. And that's an enormous journey. Parry Sound to Las Vegas is more than 2,500 miles, not counting any detours. They were not flying over the country. They were driving through it in 1978. That means fuel stops, meals, overnight stays, rest areas, and routine interactions with strangers along the way. And yet, almost none of that journey is really documented. There are no confirmed witnesses placing Mary state by state, no motel records, no restaurant employees who later recalled her, no gas station attendants who came forward, no known photographs from the trip, at least none that are publicly available. Instead, we're just left with a list: New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada. An itinerary without the moments in between. And that distinction matters, because without independent confirmation at each stage, the real question is not just what happened after Las Vegas. It's how far did Mary actually travel? She could have disappeared anywhere along the route. And that's when we arrive at February 28th. And this is the date the companion gave us as the last time he saw Mary. He claimed they reached Las Vegas, Nevada, and that he dropped her at a bus station with her luggage before driving away. But even this account raises immediate questions. Palo Alto was still more than 500 miles away. Why did the trip end there? Why was she suddenly continuing by bus? Was Las Vegas always the intended separation point? Did the plans change? Was there an argument? Did Mary choose to leave? Or did he? Was she meeting someone in Las Vegas? Was she even planning to continue to California at all? Now, none of this has ever been publicly clarified. And there's an even more basic issue. Was Mary actually at that bus station? There's no independent witness placing her there. No driver, ticket agent, or fellow passenger. No police record confirming her presence. No confirmed ticket in her name. Nothing that independently verifies that Mary Frances Gregory was inside a Las Vegas bus terminal on February 28, 1978. The claim originates entirely from the man who says he left her there. And that's where Mary's trail ends. He said he left Mary and her luggage at that bus station in Vegas. There's no confirmed evidence of anything that happened next. Mary never arrived at her stated destination in Palo Alto, and there's no known communication from her after she left Parry Sound. Now, her luggage is another unresolved piece of the case. The Doe Network reports that her bags were never recovered, while the Charlie Project states that they were. I could find no publicly available documentation explaining that contradiction. So exactly what became of Mary's belongings remains unclear. But Las Vegas has never really been confirmed as Mary's last known location. It's where her companion said he saw her last. So somewhere between Parry Sound and the destination Mary never reached, her journey ended. And nearly 50 years later, we still don't know where. Mary's disappearance leaves us with several possibilities. But one question sits underneath all of them. How much of the story have we been given that can actually be verified? Investigators suspect foul play, and the Doe Network classifies Mary's case accordingly. But the person who supplied much of the known route was the unnamed man traveling with her. And there's no evidence that he harmed Mary, and law enforcement has never publicly named him as responsible. But still, his role is impossible to ignore. He was reportedly with Mary for days. He described the route they took, and he's the source of the claim that she was last seen in Vegas. So before considering what may have happened after that, I think the first theory has to be that something happened earlier in the trip. Was his account corroborated? Did investigators verify their stops? Did anyone independently remember seeing Mary with him? Were records, receipts, motel registrations, or the vehicle itself examined? Now, those details have never been made public. And if his account was inaccurate, then Las Vegas may never have been Mary's final location at all. And that possibility completely changes the case. Another possibility is that Mary simply chose not to continue with the life she had left behind. In 1978, disappearing intentionally was far easier than it would be today. A person could use cash, travel without digital identification records, rent rooms, take buses, find temporary work, and move from place to place without creating a permanent electronic trail. If Mary reached Las Vegas alive, she may have changed plans. She could have gone somewhere other than Palo Alto. She could have met someone. She could have simply decided to start over. But there's nothing available showing that Mary wanted to disappear. No verified letter, no later confirmed phone call, no evidence that she intentionally cut ties with everyone she knew. So while this is possible, it requires us to believe Mary successfully remained hidden for decades. And Mary's family apparently believed something else entirely. According to the Charlie Project, they thought she may have suffered some form of memory loss after she disappeared. Now, what makes that detail so intriguing is that nobody explains why. There's no known medical event, accident, or confirmed sighting of Mary appearing confused or disoriented. But the idea came from her family, and families sometimes know information that never makes it into public case files. If Mary suffered an injury or medical emergency while traveling, severe disorientation could potentially explain why she never contacted home. And there is one later sighting that makes that possibility especially interesting. More than 15 years after Mary vanished, someone may have seen her in Canada. A 2004 report in the province reportedly referenced a possible sighting of Mary sometime between 1993 and 1995 at the Lougheed Hotel in Burnaby, British Columbia. If that sighting was accurate, Mary survived long after 1978. But there's no confirmation that investigators ever verified the woman's identity. And I could not find any later reporting explaining what happened with that lead. So it remains exactly that, a possible sighting. Still, it leaves open the possibility that Mary did not die during the road trip at all. If Mary truly reached Las Vegas and was left alone there, another possibility is that she encountered someone dangerous. She would have been a young woman traveling alone, carrying luggage, far from home, in an unfamiliar city. If she accepted a ride, missed a bus, went somewhere with someone she met, or was approached by the wrong person, there may have been almost no trail left behind. And that brings us to one particularly disturbing theory. Gerald and Charlene Gallego would go on to abduct and murder young women across the western United States between 1978 and 1980. Their victims were often teenagers or young women, and Charlene sometimes helped lure them toward the couple's vehicle before Gerald took control. Now, at first glance, Mary seems like someone who could have fit the general profile of their victims. But the timing matters. The Gallegos' first confirmed murders occurred in September 1978, about 6 months after Mary vanished. A suspected earlier victim, 16-year-old Sandra Butler, disappeared from Sparks, Nevada in June 1978. So if the Gallegos were responsible for Mary's disappearance, she would predate even that suspected case. And there's an even bigger problem. I have not found reliable evidence placing Gerald and Charlene Gallego in Las Vegas on February 28, 1978. So I would not call them a leading theory. There's no known connection between them and Mary. But their presence in the broader Western United States during this period is a reminder that young women traveling alone could encounter predators who are actively targeting them. Mary did not need to meet a famous serial killer for foul play to be possible. There's also the possibility that Mary was found years ago, but never identified. If she died somewhere along the route and was discovered without identification, another jurisdiction may never have connected an unidentified young woman to a missing Canadian teenager. In 1978, law enforcement agencies did not have the kind of interconnected DNA and missing person systems available today. Now, Mary now has DNA available for comparison along with partial dental records. And that means an unidentified remains case could still provide an answer. Now, after looking at all these theories, I keep coming back to the same issue. Before we ask what happened to Mary in Las Vegas, we first have to establish whether she was actually there. If independent evidence ever confirms that she reached the city alive, the possibilities narrow considerably. Maybe she boarded a bus, met someone, or intentionally changed direction. Maybe something happened to her before she ever left the terminal area. But if Las Vegas was never independently verified, then the disappearance could have happened almost anywhere earlier in the journey. And that's what makes this case so difficult. There are theories about memory loss, voluntary disappearance, and predators, about unidentified remains, about the man traveling with her. But they all depend on one unanswered question. Where was Mary Frances Gregory actually last seen? Mary's story is a reminder of just how much road travel has changed since 1978. If you attempted the same trip today, Ontario to California by car, you'd probably leave a trail almost without trying. Your phone would connect to cell towers, your credit card would record purchases, your Maps app would know where you'd been, hotels would have reservations under your name, border crossings are electronically documented. You might text photographs from the road or share your location with someone at home. But Mary had none of that. In 1978, once you drove away, you could genuinely become unreachable. You navigated with paper maps. If you wanted to call home, you found a telephone. If your plans changed somewhere in Utah, the people in Ontario wouldn't know unless you specifically contacted them. And that makes my biggest takeaway from Mary's case incredibly simple. Someone who isn't traveling with you should always know your plan. Not every gas station you're stopping at or what you're having for lunch, but somebody should know who you're traveling with, what vehicle you're in, the route you're roughly taking, where you're sleeping, and when you're supposed to arrive. And if the plan changes, tell them. If I'm traveling with somebody I don't know particularly well, I'd also send their name and contact information to someone at home. I'd send a photograph of the car and license plate too. That might sound overly cautious, but I don't think it is. You're not accusing your travel companion of being dangerous. You're simply creating a starting point if something goes wrong. And the same applies when you're separating from someone during a trip. If you're expected to arrive somewhere by car, but suddenly find yourself continuing alone by bus, train, or plane, you tell somebody. A 10-second message today can establish something investigators in Mary's case have spent decades trying to determine. And location sharing makes that even easier. You don't have to broadcast your whereabouts publicly or post your vacation in real time. In fact, I wouldn't. Share your live location privately with one or two trusted people while you're traveling, particularly if you're driving through unfamiliar or isolated areas. And don't let your phone become your entire emergency plan. Carry a roadside kit with water, food, a flashlight, first aid supplies, jumper cables, warm clothing or blankets, basic tools, and even paper maps. Also, check weather and road conditions before leaving and make sure the vehicle itself is ready for a long trip. and that last part matters on a route like Mary's. Crossing North America in February can mean wildly different conditions within a single trip. Snow and ice in Canada and the northern states, mountain weather farther west, and long stretches of highway where breaking down can leave you far from immediate help. And fatigue is its own danger. Plan regular breaks rather than trying to cover too much distance in a single day. And always stop to rest during long drives. Personally, I'd rather arrive 6 hours late than push through another 6 hours because the itinerary says I'm supposed to. The other lesson from Mary's story is about accepting help from strangers. Road trips inevitably put you in situations where you depend on people you don't know. Mechanics, hotel employees, other travelers, rides, directions. You don't need to treat every stranger as a potential predator. But you also don't owe a stranger trust just because they're being helpful. If something feels wrong, stay somewhere public. Go inside a staffed business. Arrange your own transportation rather than accepting an unexpected ride. And if you're suddenly stranded, let someone know where you are before deciding what to do next. And most importantly, don't be embarrassed to change plans. Leave the motel, get off the bus, stop traveling with someone, call somebody at 3 a.m, spend money you didn't plan to spend on a hotel. Safety outranks politeness, schedules, and budget. What strikes me most about Mary's trip is how different the same journey would look today. We have extraordinary tools that she didn't have. A 19-year-old traveler in 2026 can carry a map, camera, telephone, emergency contact list, translator, flashlight, and GPS tracker in one pocket. But those tools only matter if we use them. So on a long road trip, enjoy the freedom of being out there. Take the weird detour, stop at the roadside attraction, change your plans. That's the entire reason I love road trips. Just make sure somebody you trust knows where the road is taking you. Mary Frances Gregory was 19 years old when she disappeared in 1978. Today, she would be 68. At the time she vanished, Mary was 5'3", about 111 pounds, with a medium build, fair skin, blondish hair, and hazel eyes. She was nearsighted and wore contact lenses. She had previously worn braces to correct an overbite, and partial dental information is available that could still help identify her. Mary also had a distinctive birthmark on the right side of her chest near her rib cage, described as roughly the size of a 5-cent piece. Some case summaries also reference a mole near her waist. And after nearly 50 years, details like these still matter. Because whether Mary disappeared somewhere along that road trip, reached Las Vegas, started another life, or remains unidentified somewhere today, somebody may still know something that could finally move this case forward. If you recognize Mary, remember hearing something about her disappearance, or have information that was never reported, please don't assume it's too old or too insignificant to matter. The Ontario Police can be reached 24 hours a day at 1-888-310-1122. Their general headquarters number is 705-329-6111. And information can also be reported through your local police department or Crime Stoppers. Mary deserves more than a final location based on someone else's account. She deserves to be found. And after all these years, her family deserves to know where her journey really ended. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod, and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/thelasttrippodcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.